January 2008. The Boeing 777 was the pinnacle of commercial aviation, boasting a flawless safety record for over a decade. 2 million flights, not a single major accident. Then, just 1,000 feet above London's Heathrow Airport, everything changed. "I can't get power on the engines," screamed First Officer Liam. What brought down one of the world's most advanced aircraft? The answer wasn't at the crash site. It had vanished, as if by magic. British Airways Flight 38 embarked on a 10.5-hour journey from Beijing to London. At the controls was Captain Julian, a seasoned aviator who knew this route intimately. Alongside him, First Officer Liam, also with thousands of hours piloting the 777, shared the cockpit. This aircraft, a marvel of engineering, was celebrated for its smooth handling, modern systems, and powerful Rolls-Royce engines. For pilots like Julian and Liam, long stretches meant monitoring the sophisticated computers that largely managed the flight. Aboard, passenger Daniel looked forward to reaching Heathrow. The flight had been exceptionally smooth, uneventful. He noted they seemed to be arriving early, a pleasant surprise before reuniting with his family. As Flight 38 approached London, the sprawling urban landscape of Hounslow, bordering Heathrow, came into view. The area, accustomed to the symphony of arriving and departing jets, offered no hint of the drama about to unfold. Under the plane's automated control, the crew prepared for runway 27 left. A slight buffeting signaled increased wind gusts, around 20 to 30 knots, nothing unusual for Heathrow. The autopilot expertly managed these minor turbulences. At 1,200 feet, First Officer Liam took command for the final approach, a standard procedure. Captain Julian, tidying charts, glanced out the window, looking for their assigned gate. Everything seemed perfectly normal.
Then, at 500 feet, the impossible happened. Liam's voice, now laced with alarm, cut through the calm. "Pete, I can't get power on the engines." Julian stared at the engine instruments. They contradicted reality. The controls commanded full power, yet the gauges registered nothing. Both Rolls-Royce engines, the lifeblood of their massive jet, had simultaneously failed. With 152 souls on board, Flight 38, now a 200-ton glider, plummeted towards the bustling London suburbs. Inside the cabin, passengers remained blissfully unaware, anticipating a smooth landing. But in the cockpit, pure dread. Captain Julian saw buildings near the Hatton Cross area, a petrol station, looming large. Hitting those meant certain fatalities. The weight of his rank, the lives in his hands, pressed down. "If I don't do anything, everyone will die," he thought. With mere seconds remaining, Julian had limited options. Taking control from Liam was a possibility, but Liam, despite the crisis, was still flying the plane with skill. Julian decided against it. Raising the landing gear, a common tactic to reduce drag, was rejected. They needed the gear to absorb the brutal impact. Then, a desperate gamble: raise the flaps. Extended flaps provide lift, but also create drag. Retracting them from 30 degrees to 25 would reduce drag, increasing glide distance, but accelerate their descent. In that split second, with no time for discussion, Julian pulled the lever. He hoped this risky maneuver would provide the precious few feet needed to clear obstructions. The effect of Julian's decision was immediate. He braced, making the dreaded announcement every pilot hopes to avoid. The impact was violent, a hard landing, a huge bang, debris tearing through the cabin ceiling. Then, the uncontrollable slide. Julian, now a passenger in his own plane, thought of his family, whispering a silent goodbye.
The lights flickered. Wreckage groaned. Then, silence. Julian looked around, astonished to find himself and his crew unscarred. The captain instantly resurfaced, directing the emergency. Fuel lines, APU, hydraulics, all shut down. The smell of jet fuel filled the cabin. "Evacuate! Evacuate!" The greatest danger now was fire. Passengers slid down emergency chutes, leaving belongings, scrambling to safety. Outside, in a cool January air, the devastation was stark. The right wheel was torn off, engines ripped apart and half buried. It was no longer an aircraft. Yet, miraculously, only 47 people sustained minor injuries. The plane had narrowly missed the A30 motorway and crucial airport antennas. Had it impacted solid ground instead of soft mud and grass, a catastrophic fire was almost certain. British Prime Minister Gordon Brown lauded the crew's professionalism. The crash of Flight 38 sent shockwaves through the aviation world. It was the most severe accident at Heathrow in 3 decades, involving a Boeing 777, a machine synonymous with reliability. Lead investigator Alistair from Britain's Air Accidents Investigation Branch arrived at the scene.
The plane lay 1,000 feet short of the runway, landing gear shoved through the wings, the nose gear collapsed. The crew, including Captain Julian, were interviewed almost immediately. Julian was adamant, "This isn't our fault. We didn't do anything wrong. The engines just gave us no power." Both Rolls-Royce engines had inexplicably rolled back, losing thrust. Investigators immediately looked for common factors that could cause dual-engine failure. Fuel shortage was a primary suspect. The distinct odor of Jet A1 fuel permeated the crash site, and visible leaks from ruptured lines confirmed its presence. A quick check of the plane's dipsticks verified ample fuel on board. This theory was swiftly discarded.
The 777's sophisticated systems meant a wealth of data was available. Flight data recorders, cockpit voice recorders, radar, and radio transmissions provided over 1,400 data points. Data retrieval specialist Owen retrieved the black boxes and the quick access recorder, a front-mounted diagnostic tool with greater memory capacity. But a chilling discovery emerged. The QAR data ceased 45 seconds before impact. Initial thoughts pointed to an electrical problem, potentially affecting both the QAR and the engines. The 777 relies heavily on computer-assisted controls, with pilot inputs routed through a central system. A massive system failure seemed plausible. The FDRs were sent to the AAIB's Farnborough facility. An electrical issue should be evident there. However, interpreting the complex data would take time investigators felt they didn't have, with hundreds of 777s flying daily. Meanwhile, authorities analyzed fuel samples from the wrecked plane. Could a bad batch have been the culprit? Traced back to South Korea, shipped to China, and piped to Beijing airport, the fuel was compared to 1,200 other batches in the UK and found to be very good. The possibility of a physical blockage in the fuel tanks was also explored. Small pieces of tape and a red scraper were found, likely remnants from the plane's assembly 7 years prior. While concerning, their tiny size ruled them out as a cause for a significant fuel restriction. Investigators also considered a previous incident. Less than 3 years earlier, a Malaysian 777 experienced an uncommanded pitch-up after takeoff from Perth, Australia. The autopilot suddenly forced the nose up. The pilot took manual control and landed safely. This too was attributed to a computer problem. Could Flight 38's crash be another symptom of a wider, inherent flaw in the 777's electronic brain? The thought cast a pall over the entire industry.
However, detailed analysis of Flight 38's flight data recorders ruled out any specific electrical or computer system fault that would cause both engines to roll back. The 45-second QAR delay was simply a buffering mechanism, not an electrical failure. What the FDRs did confirm was that at 720 feet, the right engine lost power, followed 7 seconds later by the left. The auto throttles commanded more thrust, but the engines remained unresponsive. The fuel metering valves, crucial for regulating fuel flow, were fully open, calling for maximum fuel, yet the engines weren't getting it. Another theory, extreme cold weather. Flight 38's route took it high over Siberia, where temperatures plummeted to negative 74 degrees Celsius. Jet fuel can wax and freeze at very low temperatures, clouding systems. Pilots constantly monitor fuel temperature, never letting it drop below negative 34 degrees Celsius. Captain Julian confirmed they consistently monitored it. The fuel never reached dangerous levels. In fact, as they approached London, the fuel temperature had already risen to a safer negative 20 degrees Celsius. Another plausible explanation evaporated. Investigators were at a dead end. Mountains of data, physical evidence, but no clear answer. Media and industry experts expected a swift resolution, but weeks turned into months. Lead investigator Alistair found himself repeating a mantra. They had the pilots, they had the passengers, they had the aircraft, everything there except the thing that caused it, that had disappeared as if by magic. Frustration mounted. They had exhausted all conventional explanations. It was time for a different approach. Alistair embraced the famous logic of Sherlock Holmes. Whatever is left, however improbable, must be the cause. Their improbable suspect? Ice. The greatest challenge? Proving ice was responsible when all physical evidence of it would have melted hours before they arrived.
3 months after the crash, lead engineer Gareth flew to Seattle, to Boeing's facilities, to collaborate on a radical new line of inquiry. They needed to prove how and why ice, elusive and transient, could bring down a 777. They reassembled sections of Flight 38's fuel system pipes on a specialized test rig. Engineers knew ice could form in fuel lines, but aircraft were designed with a solution, the fuel oil heat exchanger. Cold fuel passes through thin tubes surrounded by hot engine oil, warming the fuel and preventing icing in the delicate control systems. The FOHE was designed precisely to prevent what they now suspected. The team needed to demonstrate three things: significant ice accumulation in the pipes, a sudden release of that ice, and its ability to block the FOHE. Initial tests simulating the extremely cold temperatures of the Siberian flight struggled to form substantial ice. Below -20 degrees Celsius, ice crystals were too cold to stick effectively to the pipe walls. The breakthrough came when they tested warmer fuel temperatures, between -20 and -8 degrees Celsius, the sticky range. Slushy ice formed readily and adhered to the pipe walls, accumulating significantly. Now we're getting somewhere, Gareth realized. But how could this accumulated ice suddenly break free and cause a catastrophic blockage?
The investigators meticulously analyzed Flight 38's entire flight profile. The journey from Beijing involved a gradual climb, a long cruise at steady speed with low power settings, and then a gradual descent. The fuel temperatures fell and rose accordingly, allowing ice to slowly accumulate in the sticky range within the fuel lines. Crucially, the autopilot maintained a consistent fuel flow for hours, never demanding a sudden surge of engine power, until the approach to Heathrow. Turbulence during the final approach led to 4 distinct demands for varied thrust, including a very high fuel flow of 12,000 to 13,000 pounds per hour. This was the first time in hours the engines required an abrupt increase in power. Then, 10 months after the Heathrow crash, the elusive culprit struck again. A Delta flight, another Rolls-Royce-powered 777, experienced engine rollback at 39,000 feet above the United States. Fortunately, the engine recovered, and the aircraft landed safely in Atlanta. This incident mirrored Flight 38, a long flight from Shanghai to Atlanta with fuel temperatures in that critical sticky range. The engine's reaction was eerily similar. Subsequent examination of the Delta flight revealed no electronic, mechanical, or fuel system faults. The evidence strongly pointed to ice. The pattern was emerging. With renewed conviction, the Boeing Seattle lab prepared for a final, definitive test. They would precisely replicate Flight 38's conditions: 3 hours of ice accumulation, simulating the long, steady cruise, followed by a sudden, aggressive increase in power, mirroring the final approach to Heathrow. It was one of their last attempts.
What happened next broke the case wide open. As the engines suddenly demanded more power, the fuel pressure downstream of the FOH dropped dramatically. When investigators examined the FOH, they found a layer of soft ice, precisely where it shouldn't be. The ice, accumulated deep within the fuel lines, had broken free under the sudden increase in pressure, then collected across the face of the fuel-oil heat exchanger. It wasn't a total blockage. The ice had some porosity, allowing minimal fuel to trickle through, but it was drastically insufficient for the power demands. The engineers identified the subtle, critical flaw. The fuel tubes within the FOH protruded just a few millimeters above the hot oil. This tiny design detail prevented the ice from fully contacting the warm surface and melting. Facing a threat no one knew existed, Captain Julian and First Officer Liam had no chance. The Delta flight, however, had recovered. Why? After its engine rollback, the Delta crew briefly reduced engine power to idle. This simple action, not available to Flight 38 so close to the ground, caused the blockage in the FOH to clear. The mystery was finally solved. Rolls-Royce swiftly redesigned a fuel oil heat exchanger. The protruding tubes were eliminated, creating a flush surface. Now, even if ice crystals formed, they would pass directly through, preventing accumulation. Other aircraft manufacturers were ordered to inspect their own fuel systems for similar vulnerabilities.
Captain Julian, First Officer Liam, and the entire crew of Flight 38 received the British Airways Safety Medal, the company's highest honor. They faced an unprecedented failure, an invisible enemy, and in just 30 seconds made split-second decisions that saved 152 lives. Their actions were exemplary. The investigation, consuming thousands of hours and millions of dollars, proved that the smallest, most improbable detail, ice, the culprit that melted away, could bring down the most advanced machinery. Through relentless diligence and a little inspiration from Sherlock Holmes, the truth emerged, making air travel safer for everyone.